Morning, Trainiacs. We got ourselves a new trainer, the new Cyclops H2 hammer. We got ourselves a new Scody kit back from Half Ironman Worlds, and we are going to talk about Jan Frodeno versus Javier Gomez versus Allistair Brownlee right after this Zwift ride. So, I shot that before Jan announced that he was injured and won't be racing Kona. But the video still applies, except for when I say something like, Jan looks healthy right now. Enjoy. One half hour on Zwift. Easy effort. Off season is a beautiful thing. Whew. All right. Jan Frodeno versus Javier Gomez versus Allistair Brownlee. They don't just go toe-to-toe in the race course. They go toe-to-toe in the most intense and super serious triathlon YouTube channel in the world. I got sticky shoes. So, Trainiacs, I think that Allistair Brownlee, Javier Gomez, and Jan Frodeno are probably three of the best athletes to ever distance up from short distance racing. And you know my opinion on that having that speed in your legs that sprint and Olympic distance racing gives you makes you a all-around better athlete and allows you to be faster when you step up to that longer distance. That said, what we saw this past week at the Half Ironman World Championships was some of the best racing ever in longer distance racing. Probably the most competitive, and we saw what happened. Jan Frodeno had to run a 1:06 half marathon. A 1:06 half marathon in a half Ironman. That time would have set the all-time course record in our local half Ironman, which is run by about 5,000 people every year for 40 years. So these guys are all good, and they're coming into it with the best pedigree of anyone that ever has come into long distance racing has ever had. Gold medalists, world champions at multiple distance events, multiple years, lots of tenure. But the question becomes, who is going to be the most dominant athlete at the long distance? I don't necessarily think that it's Jan Frodeno, but I also don't necessarily think that it's not going to be Jan Frodeno. So let's compare each of the athletes point for point, as we like to do. So starting off with the swim, it's basically a wash between these three athletes. At any one point in time, any one of them can come out at the very front of the swim pack, but the bottom line is that they are all going to be in the front swim pack every single race that they race together, and they're probably just going to be trading spots between like being first or second or third or fourth, but they're going to be coming in at the same time out of the swim, probably about equally as fatigued. The bike, however, is where we start seeing some differences. At the moment, Jan is the strongest. He has developed into a really strong cyclist at the full distance races. We saw that last year where he biked with some of the super bikers coming out just in behind Cameron Wurf, Lionel Sanders. That's nothing to shake a stick at. That is some serious riding. Now, he wasn't able to shake the group in the Half Ironman World Championships. He came out right at the front, however, with Sam Appleton, who I think is probably the best half-distance cyclist out there. Well, before you say, what are you talking about, Appo? Huh? New? Well, the guy has outbiked Andrew Starkowitz in a half-distance race. There. He's good. Allistair Brownlee, I'd say, would probably be the next strongest and maybe even more talented. What we used to see with him in ITU races is that instead of sitting in the pack and letting the pack do the work and just getting ready for the run, Allistair Brownlee would actually get in people's faces and yell at them if they weren't sharing the workload in the pack. He would actually break gaps so that he could come into the run ahead of the pack, which is unheard of for years in ITU, where people would just kind of float around with the pack. But Allistair didn't want to do that. He wanted to attack, and he had the legs to do it. He wanted to do that in the Half Ironman World Championships and break up the group 50K into the bike. It didn't end up happening because everyone is so strong right now, and he probably isn't at his peak, but I think he has as much, maybe more potential as Jan Frodeno. I would say the weakest cyclist of the three is probably Javier Gomez. He was never really known for pushing the pace much in ITU racing. He was kind of one of those athletes that would sit in the pack and then let his run legs do the work at the end of the race. And what we saw in Port Elizabeth at the Half Iron World Championships is that not once did he take a turn at the front. That kind of tells me that the guy isn't as strong as the other athletes that are able to push the pace and put hurt into the group. And when you start going into longer distance races where the bike is such a huge part of building time and being fresh for the run, I think that that might be Javier's Achilles heel. Once we get into the run, we start looking at two different things, speed and endurance. I think in order of speed, it's been shown time and time again that Allistair is the fastest, followed by Javier, followed by Jan. When we look back at the times that they used to race against each other in ITU distance racing, Allistair would win when they would go head to head by upwards of 20 to 40 seconds over Javier. Javier would be in behind by that 20 to 40 seconds, and Jan might be as much as a minute to 2.5 minutes down from those two athletes. But I think what we saw at the Half Ironman World Championships is that the longer distance runs are not just an outright speed run like sprints and Olympics. They involve a lot of endurance and they involve a lot of strength. You need to be really hardy in these races. And what we see is the difference between Allistair and Javier, who have just twitchy fast short course kind of speed, and Jan, it's like he's got old man speed, like old man strength to grind out fast pace for a long period of time, and he said at one point he wanted to let his endurance show through, and he definitely did that. So as far as the run goes in long course racing, I might have to say Jan, and much more Jan. But when we look at all this, it's all kind of like Jan could have finished third, Javier could have very easily won, Allistair could have won at the Half Ironman World Championships. I truly believe that, and that it was just a matter of everyone being pushed so far to their limit. It was so fast. Like, for them to go 3:36 on that course, that's not a fast course, but they were pushing themselves to the breaking point, and it was just a matter of who had the stuff on that day, not necessarily who is the better athlete all the time. So let's look at some intangibles. Well, Jan is proven. He knows how to win at the half distance. This year, he's been killing the half distance, absolutely putting pain into even Lionel Sanders at Half Ironman Oceanside. He's won multiple times in Kona. He has won at the short distance events, but he is hungry right now, and he's a proven winner, so we can never count him out. Allistair and Javier, however, they're fairly unproven at this long distance event. As I've always said, Allistair has a real history of injuries, and that's going to start showing itself to be a real detriment when you get up to the longer distance events where you're pounding for more time and there's more things that can go wrong in the event. And as Allistair gets older, that's only going to become a bigger issue, as we saw with Jan, who had some back issues last year in 2017. Javier, however, is pretty resilient, not having much history of injury. Can you guys hear the tick-tick of Pete going back and forth there? Pete, 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 Pete. Come on, bud. Not interested. If we're looking at the biggest race and the determining factor of who is the best long course athlete being judged by what happens at Kona, you gotta say that heat becomes a big factor. Jan obviously loves the heat, having won multiple times at Kona. Allistair, not known for really liking the heat very much, however, he did win in Rio. That was hot. Javier doesn't seem to over or underperform drastically in heat, so that's a tough call, but we know that Jan is a cut above. So if we've got to place Jan, Javier, and Allistair in order of where I think they're at on any given day, I think it's like a 1A, 1B, 1C, but I'm not going to cop out and say that. I think that Jan has at least proven himself to be resilient, to be adapted to the long distance racing, to be adapted to different conditions, whether it's heat or whether it's heavy training volumes of long distance racing. So I'm going to give Jan the 1A, and then the 1B, 1C, well, when it came right down to it, Allistair Brownlee won multiple times over and over and over, besting Javier Gomez. So I have to give him the edge and say that Allistair is probably the 1B, while Javier is the 1C. The one caveat that I would say to that, Jan is getting older. So he's gonna be probably one of the first ones to crack. Allistair depends on staying healthy, and if he gets injured once, maybe twice more in a serious sort of way, his entire career could not be over, but probably be taken out of that top ranking. Javier, I think, is probably more resilient. He's still got that greasy fast speed, but he is only 2 years younger than Jan Frodeno, so it's not like he's got a lot of years to really play catch up to him. Bottom line, as long as they're all healthy and as long as they're stepping up to the same start line, I am happy, because what we saw in Port Elizabeth, South Africa was an incredible event, putting out probably some of the best performances we've ever seen by 3 people to get onto the podium in a half distance race. So we are in for a treat. So there you go, Trainiacs. If you aren't already subscribed, hit the subscribe button below to make sure that you don't miss out on our coverage of Kona. If you are subscribed, you're like the Bert to my Ernie. You are awesome. Later, Trainiacs.